We are on location in Prince George, and today's guest is Neil. Is it Godbout?
It's Godbout.
Godbout. That's what I said last time. Neil Godbout, it's great to have you on.
Thanks.
And we've got a lot to talk about. Neil has quite the resume. We're going to find out all about it. But we're going to start with the Chamber of Commerce because that's initially how I met you. And so you just this January stepped into the role of, is it executive director or CEO?
It's executive director. So I actually started in March of 2024. I was covering mat leave, Quinlan Young's mat leave. And then in October, she resigned the position. She wanted to spend more time with her young family. And so worked out an arrangement with the board to stay on as permanent. And we did that in December. And so here I am.
Perfect.
You're stuck with me.
Yeah, I stuck with you, I guess, now until you find something else, because you seem to do a lot of things. I know right now you just stepped into a role with the Community Arts Council. I do want to talk about the Chamber a little bit more before we do that, but let's just quickly talk about the Arts Council, because I know you were just in here yesterday, and it's actually this building where we're shooting this podcast out of. Is part of the Arts Council, I guess, the digital portion of that.
Right.
So what are you kind of doing now? Because this is a new role for you that you just got.
So I attended my first meeting yesterday of the Prince George and District Community Arts Council. I was brought on the board just because of now I'm representing 530 of our members. That's how big our chamber is in terms of of the number of businesses that belong to the chamber, and one of those members is the Arts Council, and of course you're also a member too with your company. So it's so the chamber actually has more than 40 not-for-profits that are members of the chamber. And so I've been wanting to really trying to work with more of the not-profits to connect them with the other for-profit, the small businesses, but also large ones, to connect them. But then also to use my role with the chamber to work more closely with arts groups. And of course, the Arts Council has some very ambitious plans to redevelop this site at Studio 2880, and I thought, sign me up. That's where I want to be. There's some exciting things that they hope to land over the next 2-3 years, and that sounds like work I'd like to do.
But going back to the chamber, because I just recently became a chamber member, and I had no idea that the chamber had the type of benefits that it did. And I don't mean benefits just like, insurance rates and stuff like that. I mean things like the mayor's breakfast, stuff like that, like networking events where you can sit down with people that have prominent positions in the city and toss ideas back and forth and hear their ideas and listen to them talk about kind of the future of Prince George and stuff.
But more importantly, they want to hear from people like you, right? They want to hear from, new business owners, entrepreneurs. They want to hear their ideas. They want to, because they feed off your energy, but also they recognize, in particular for the elected officials, is that they recognize that when you prosper, that's good for the economy, that's good for the community, it's good for them, right? And they often come into it with, how can I help? But it's also right. They also want to hear about your challenges, because then they can, if they know what the problems are, then they can work to address them, whether there's, administrative red tape, like whatever that looks like. So it's a two-way conversation for sure. So I'm glad that you've seen that benefit, because certainly that's the value proposition we tell our members is, yes, you're paying hundreds of dollars for a chamber membership, but we hope we're giving you something in return.
How else does the chamber support business?
It's certainly the events, and why our chamber believes so much in events is really it's about bringing people together and the members together. Then the other piece we really try and do for focus on with membership is the advocacy, and that's in terms of advocating for pro-business things, whether it's with our local government, regional government, and then working with the BC Chamber, the provincial government, and the Canadian Chamber on the national level, is really advocating for things that, frankly, help make small businesses and, well, businesses of all size more successful. And so whether that's on the housing front or and sometimes there's partnerships to be had there. I mean, housing is, we would work with the Home Builders Association. And so there's and I would say that advocacy then does have that partnership. Is like, who can we work with to advocate for different things? The North Central Local Government Association meeting is next month in Prince Rupert. So the City of Prince George is bringing some resolutions, policy recommendations that would go on to the provincial government around improved conservation officer service. They're also bringing a recommendation around a secure psychiatric, safe psychiatric care facility in Prince George. Well, when I found out what the city was working on with that, it was like, as a chamber, though, both of those things would be good for business. And some people might think, well, geez, why would improving the conservation officer service be good for business? Well, it's, I would argue, great for business, whether it's from ecotourism operators, but also just people going out in the backcountry, whether it's just regular users. But I mean, it even applies to businesses, and we certainly see this in here in Prince George, is businesses that their operation backs onto forested areas. And so we want to keep those businesses secure. We want to keep those employees safe. If they're showing up at 5 a.m., right, is they want to know, hey, there's a bear. They want to be able to pick up the phone and get a conservation officer on the phone who can come out and help them with that. So we're bringing our own resolution to the BC Chamber AGM this year. So that when government receives these policy recommendations, they'll go, oh, the City of Prince George so local government is recommending improved conservation officer service. And so is the business community. Maybe we should look at that. So those are the kinds of partnerships, but also that's the kind of social and political advocacy that the chamber tries to do.
Yeah, that was one thing interesting about joining the chamber. And it was funny because I became a member because you wanted to hire me to do a project.
Yeah. And
I laugh about it because it's like, did he really want me to do this project, or did he just want me to become a member? It's just kind of a joke.
And two things can be true at the same time. The answer was yes. Yeah. I wanted you as a member. Yeah. And I also wanted you for the project.
Yeah. And I'm so glad I became a member because like you talk about all the offerings that the chamber offers, I haven't even taken advantage of the newsletter stuff that goes out. Like, I haven't written anything for my business yet, but the networking that happens within the chamber and events, that in itself is what's most valuable to me.
And you're identifying something that we often tell to our members, especially when they get their annual renewal for their annual dues. Yeah. Well, what does the chamber do for me? Well, being a chamber member is there's a part of it is, well, are you taking part, right? What are you putting into your membership? It's like having a gym membership, right? If you just buy your gym membership and don't show up to the gym, well, right, you've got to put in some effort, and that's really what we tell the business owner operators who sign up for a chamber membership, is that if you put some time in, if you come out to the events, if you network, you're going to learn some things, you're going to meet some different people. And those things that you're going to take away will be good for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A business like mine, thrives on word of mouth.
100%.
It's completely referral based, the work that I do. Right. And kind of every other day there's somebody else contacting you to ask you or inquire about something. And so, yeah, that networking is key for a lot of businesses, especially a business like mine. But let's talk about a little bit before the chamber, because I know you worked for the Citizen and you were an editor at the Citizen. And
so I'm a recovering journalist.
What does that mean, recovering journalist?
I was a journalist for 35 years.
Wow.
So, right, I that's what I wanted to do coming out of high school. I graduated from the journalism program at Carleton University in Ottawa in 1990, and so, yeah, I was a journalist from the mid 80s until I guess March of 2024. So it was, yeah, coming on to 40 years that I had been. Well, I started doing it as a high school senior. I was writing the high school news column for my local newspaper in Lake Country, and and I caught the bug, and I went off to journalism school, and then I worked as a reporter and editor in Penticton and Kelowna and Salmon Arm, and kept creeping north, and ended up in Prince George, and so it's. This became home, and so, yeah, I was at the Citizen in 2 different stints for almost 25 years.
What was it like being a journalist? I like picture the comic books, right? Spider-Man, the guy shows up, takes pictures, and then writes about it. Is that kind of like really what it's like, or is there a lot of time?
It's funny you mentioned the Spider-Man comics, because that's what I grew up with. And so, but it wasn't like that. There were, I mean, at the end of the day, you're being paid to have conversations with people, to ask them a few questions about what they're doing or not doing, and then you write about it. And I very much was educated in that democracy. This is, of course, the benefit of a 4-year program that happens at the university in the national capital. Is my instructors very much told me that journalism in a free democratic society is an essential institution within that democracy. That you can't have an informed electorate without journalism.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then that informed electorate then, right, elects the officials that will best represent their values and their interests. So that was my education, and certainly that was my approach as a reporter and as an editor, was feeling then that responsibility, that obligation to the audience of whoever was reading my work, was that I'm trying to kind of give you the whole truthful story as much as I know it in that moment, because a news story is just like a news photography. It's a snapshot of a moment. It certainly doesn't cover it all, but it gives a taste for what's going on. And then certainly, really, I had the opportunity in my career, particularly at the Citizen, of working with some great people on some award-winning work that really made a difference in the community, in terms of that it brought meaningful change in terms of, well, the one thing I'm thinking of, the Citizen won the Michener Award in 2007, which is a public service journalism award that's awarded annually by the Governor General.
No
the
kidding.
Citizen remains to this day the smallest news outlet in Canada to ever win.
Wow.
The Michener. And so that was actually Gordon Hoekstra's work. He's a longtime reporter at the Vancouver Sun now, but when he was at the Citizen, there were a lot of truckers that were getting hurt and mostly being killed, because when you crash with a logging truck, chances are as a driver you die. And so there were a lot of deaths happening, mostly in the bush. And so he started looking into, why is this happening and who's taking responsibility? And it turned out nobody was. Right. I mentioned ICBC earlier. They were like, well, that's happening not on those are happening on logging roads, not on public roads. So that's not really our problem.
Right.
The RCMP, well, that's not really, again, that's on work sites. And then WorkSafe was like, well, a logging site isn't really a work site. It's a work site, but they're on the road.
Yeah.
So, and then the forest companies were saying, well, they don't actually work for us. They're contractors. So nobody was taking responsibility. And so by the time Gord's series finished up, the provincial government was hired a forestry coroner and was spending $50 million working with logging companies to make forest logging roads safer.
Oh, yeah.
And so it went from, there was a period of time in the early 2000s where 40, 50 logging truck drivers a year were being killed in BC. And that went down to single digits within a few years.
And
So to be involved in work that saved lives, that was pretty cool. People around the world, doesn't matter where you're from, what culture you're from, we're motivated by stories. Right. I mean, stories, right, affect us emotionally, and stories affect our worldview and can often then be the inspiration for us to take action.
Yeah.
And that was certainly the part that I enjoyed about being a journalist, was having access to really interesting people who gave me the privilege to tell their story. Or in the case of some of the political work, or even talking about that forestry series that I was involved with, not so much as a writer on the editing standpoint, was just really kind of getting to some of the, I guess, the meatier issues, and really trying to right, understand, like, why are these things happening in the world and why aren't we doing anything about it?
Yeah. You're executive director of the Chamber. You've got access to all these people in Prince George. You record podcasts. Why aren't you doing that? You can still be a journalist at the Chamber.
So really my role at the Chamber, right, is to just do what I can to help owner operators like you of small businesses be successful. Being a journalist is to sometimes speak truth to power. There's still a role, certainly in the advocacy role with the Chamber, to do some of that, but journalists do it far more aggressively. Right. And so I'm quite proud of some of the stuff I did in my later career as the senior editor at the Citizen around, calling to attention the rather significant rise in wages amongst the non-union and senior staff at the City of Prince George in 2017, and then the cost overruns around the parkade, and working with Arthur Williams, the reporter at the time, to really try and uncover some of that, freedom of information requests to get documents, and right, like, that's the kind of stuff to do as a journalist, that as a Chamber, you're trying to be far more collaborative, where from a journalism standpoint, that's far, you're not collaborating at that point. It's actually adversarial. Right, because you have powerful interests in administration and on the political side that would rather you not inform people about that.
I would love to see you just keep doing the journalism part, even if it's just once or twice.
The other thing, the other thing I've found since joining the Chamber, people talk to me more now because I'm not a journalist.
Well, I'm not saying to be a journalist. I'm saying,
right.
but you already have that experience to bring the conversation out of people, and maybe pushing a couple topics is good for somebody. Like, if you were to ask me about this place and you pushed me on a few topics, it would probably get me to realize, kind of like, what I'm doing is maybe I should go in a different direction. Maybe I could pursue a different avenue.
I suppose I do that already a little bit, in that I host a weekly radio show on CFIS I host it Tuesday after 9, and I try and keep that radio show from 9 to 10 every Tuesday. I try and keep that radio show quite business focused, and a business / economic focused. locally, but I've certainly had on guests over the last few months. We've talked about tariffs and interprovincial trade and all of that stuff, and so I guess I've tried to have on guests who maybe provide some of that context in a talk radio format.
Yeah, that's cool. So that's 93.1
Yep.
CFIS. Yeah. So I know Alan there. I met with him just this morning, yesterday morning. Can't remember now. But yeah, he interviewed me and we sat and talked for 15 minutes. So that was fun. My first time being live on the radio. So I'll have to check out your show and
it's on their website. Right, they post the shows. So it's we had on Colleen and Chrissy from the downtown Prince George from the Business Improvement Association this past week. So
I don't know them. I should talk to them. Yeah.
Yeah. So they really focus on downtown, but again, same thing is right. We're both of business associations, but we certainly we might have different approaches on some things, but at the end of the day, we're both trying to encourage positive business activity. So there's a lot of collaboration between our groups.
Right. And you work closely with PG Community Foundation as well here.
We actually share office space with them
yeah.
right now on 7th Avenue. So yeah. And and that one works well with me because as an individual, I have my own fund at the community foundation. So I'm
it's a good group of people there too.
Yeah, for sure.
That's one thing I find with Prince George. It's not a big enough city that people keep away. You know, it's like everybody's still really close together.
It's a big small town.
Yeah, big small town. That's a good explanation. Yeah, it's a good group of people that are kind of always willing to help. You know, and work closely, like Community Foundation, the Chamber of Commerce. Spirit of the North is another one. I love that organization, and I've only recently started working with them. And the work that they do, I find, is super important. That's something, you know, I could need cardiac care at some point in the future, right? You don't know. It could be genetics, and it could be, you know, history, could be food, could be all sorts of different things, and there's no way to kind of know for sure if you're going to have heart problems.
And we've certainly learned in the history of Prince George in the last 25, 30 years that if we don't, as Prince George and as regional residents, advocate for our healthcare interests, that Victoria won't necessarily be all that responsive. And so we really have to work hard, right? We had a huge doctor's shortage here in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we filled CN Center. It was still called the Multiplex at the time, but 6,000 people came out to a healthcare rally.
Wow.
6,000 people came out to a healthcare rally. The result of that, right? That's how you make politicians in your provincial capital pay attention. 6,000 people came out in Prince George for a healthcare rally. The result was the Northern Medical Program, right? Our at UNBC, right? Let's train doctors. If we train them in the north, they'll be far more likely to live and work here. And so Prince George and the region is beneficiary of that to this day. So that's where then that led to Spirit of the North, right? Is realizing that, and that gets back to that sense of community and community building. And when we work together, good things happen.
Yeah, totally. You wrote a trilogy, and it's a young adult fantasy era. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not
my daughter was born in 1996. So right around, I guess, 2007, 2008, right? As a young reader herself, she really fell for the Twilight books. And so, right, as a curious dad, I was, what's all this fuss about Twilight? What's all this Edward and what's her name again? Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, what's all the fuss about with these kinds of books? And so I read the series, and they're page turners, well-written books. Except that I got to the end and I was like, I think I could do better.
Oh yeah.
But I looked at it as better, and not necessarily writing them better, but as a dad raising a daughter, I I wasn't very pleased with the message of Twilight, right? Which, and of course now I've remembered the female lead's name, Bella. Is I was not happy with this very traditional, Bella's helpless and save me, Edward.
Yeah.
That didn't make me very happy, right? I'm trying to raise a young, strong daughter in a modern world,
Mm.
and right, those very traditional gender, right? That, you know, the damsel in distress, and the powerful male character in this case, who happens to be a vampire that's been living for hundreds of years, and just the power dynamic just seemed very unequal to me.
Mhm.
And so I just started with a very simple premise of like, okay, I'm going to write young adult fantasy novel of my own for an audience of one, my daughter.
Mhm.
But I'm going to reverse the gender roles.
Hmm.
And okay, well, I'm not going to use vampires. That's a little too obvious. So I kind of made up some creatures of my own that are eternal. And you mentioned comic books earlier. I kind of wanted that whole Marvel Comics, the future of the universe is at stake, right? I wanted kind of that big, ambitious. So, but I reversed it, where it was right. The lead male character was 17 years old and a bit of a bumbling nerd, probably based on this guy at that time. But the teenage character he meets is a guardian of the universe who's hiding from the other guardians because she's done something kind of bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the other guardians aren't very happy about it, and they're looking for her, but she's hiding out on Earth as a human and doing very human things like going to high school.
Okay.
And so right there, and there's that kind of falling in, and then of course, romance starts, but then things happen, and so then everything goes off the rails. And so much like Twilight, right, there's he becomes aware of right, this guardian world and what's happening, and gets embroiled in it, and so right. But again, it really just started. So I wrote it over the period of about 9 or 10 months, just a first draft, and I gave it to my daughter, and she read it in 2 days and was, Dad, this is her exact words. And again, she was 11 or 12. This is good enough to be in the library. I was like, oh, well, okay. So I spent another 3-4 months kind of cleaning it up and revising it. And then I started shopping it around, and I got the rejection letters, and nothing really happened. And then I heard that there was actually a science fiction fantasy publishing house here in Prince George that I hadn't even approached. I was approaching Canadian and American publishing houses, large and small, and getting the rejection letters. I was also trying to get an agent, because you can't get into the bigger publishing houses without an agent. So, and I got some agents that, okay, they were interested, send me the entire manuscript, and then, oh, sorry, no thanks, right? Because you kind of go through the audition process. But then I sent it to Bundoran Press. It's no longer here in Prince George, but there was, like I said, a small sci-fi fantasy publishing house here in Prince George. So I sent it off, and about 4 months later, just randomly, I got a call. Hey, we really like this, and can we talk? Because we'd like to publish it. What? And we'll pay you. Right. And okay. So then we got down that road, and then of course I just sold the first one, and they were like, is there more?
Oh yeah.
Well, of course I lied. Of course there's more. There's a whole trilogy. In fact, there was no trilogy. Did I have, as an outline, did I have fuller backstory and a bit of a future like development of it, yeah, so that I could place the characters in the first novel within a period of time.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a full trilogy, and so the second and third books I had to write over a period of about 18 months.
Oh, wow.
So that was a pretty intense
Yeah.
18 months.
Yeah.
And I ended up writing the two of them simultaneously,
Oh, yeah.
where I had outlines for the two, and I wrote the second one pretty much straight up. But then as I'm writing the third one, I'm going back to the second one. These two things have to connect, and
Right.
yeah. So
What is it? What is it called?
So it's called the Broken Guardian trilogy, and so the first book is. This has been a while. You're putting me on the spot a little bit. Disintegrate, Dissolve, and Resolve. That's the third one.
Neat.
And so then as part of it, my publisher, Virginia O'Dine, who is still here in Prince George, she sold the publishing house, but still lives here in Prince George. And if the O'Dine name rings a bell,
Marietta.
she is the mother of Marietta, our
Yeah.
Olympic double bronze medalist.
Yeah.
But Virginia said, okay, well, I'm publishing these books. You have to come to these conventions with me.
Mm.
So I went to When Worlds Collide in Calgary, and I went to World Fantasy with her in Toronto. And so some of these things, right, where you can hawk your books and you meet other writers. And so then I was quite shocked that the second and third books of the trilogy were nominated for Aurora Awards, so they were both of those books were nominated for best teen sci-fi fantasy novel of the year.
Wow.
And I was up against the one year I was up against Kelly Armstrong. Well, her books are on the New York Times bestsellers list. I mean, she is like the Canadian teen fantasy writer.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, she churns out 2 books a year, and she's Stephen King in the teen fantasy space. And then there's me from Prince George with my little book in my little trilogy. So it was just thrilling to be nominated.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool. Yeah. I'm looking forward to having my daughter check it out, and I'll let you know what she thinks.